Բարերեգո հարկելի հարազատներ հորիզոն հայկական հերոստակայանի բաստարեն գողջունեն ձեր բոլորը գսկսենք մեր այսօրվան հերթական հանդիպում ինչպես ամեն երեքշաբթի ահավասիկ նույնպես այսօր։ Ես Մանուկ Սերայդարյանն եմ, իսկ այսօրվա մեր զրուցակիցը գուքա մեզի աշխարհի իսկապես եւ փառացիորեն աշխարհի մյուս կողմեն եւ ուղղահայաց եւ հորիզոնական առումներով բայց եւ այնպես անձնավորություն, որոնք գենթատրեմ կոնեցես մե ոմանք հանդիպած են, որովհետեւ առաջին անգամը չէ, որ մենք այդ անձնավորության հետ արիթ ունենանք զրուցելու հորիզոնի պաստարեն կամ այս դաղավարեն։ Ով է եւ ինչի մասին կխոսենք։ Սովորության համաձայն գավավինենք ձեր համբերությանը եւ գովաստային պիչում են յետ միասին գողջունենք մեր զրուցակիցը։ Եվ ասպես հարկերի հայրենագիցներ ահավասիկ կսկսենք մեր այսօրվան երթը, ներածագանի մեջ ինչպես որ գսեի այսօրվան մեր զրուցակից եւ պիտի ճուզեի իսել մեր հյուրը, այլ մեր զրուցակիցը մեզի գուկա աշխարհի երկրակունտի հագարակ կողմեն եւ հորիզոնական եւ ուղղահայաց առումներով։ Ճիշտ հագարակ կողմը եւ ճիշտ հագարակ կողմը։ Եթե գրծակ պատկերացնել բարին, եթե ոչ, այսօր մեր զրուցակիցը մեզի գուկա Նյու Զիլանդեն։ Բայց ոչ մաորի է, ոչ աբորիջեն է։ Այսօրվան մեր ծեր զրուցակիցը մեր սիրելի դոկտոր Մարիա Արմուդյանն է, հարգելի բարեկամներ, որը դարիներ շարունակ Լոս Անջելեսի մեջ եղած է ռադիո հաղորդավար, քաղաքական գիտություններում մասնակից, ինչպես նաև այժմ Նյու Զիլանդի Auckland քաղաքի Auckland համալսարանի University of Auckland-ի մեջ Political Science-ի քաղաքական գիտություններու դասախոս։ Միացեք ինձ եւ ողջունենք Եվ մենք դարիներ առաջ արիթ ունեցած ենք այստեղ անգամ եւս զրուցելու, ահավասիկ կրգին անգամ այդ բադեհությունը ներկայացած է մեզի։ Dr. Armoudian, good evening, բարի երեկո։
Շատ շնորհակալ եմ։
Մեծ հաճույքով եւ մեզի համար շատ հաճելի արիթ է, որ արիթը գիտեմ որ գար ժամանակով ժամանած եք Լոս Անջելես, բայց անպայմանորեն չմերժեցիք մեր հրավերը հորիզոն ներկայանալու։ Դարիներ առաջ մենք իրարու հետ
Քեզի համար։
Շնորհակալ եմ շատ այդ սերազնվությունն է։ Շնորհակալություն։ Մենք տարիներ առաջ զրուցած ենք այստեղ, խոսած ենք քաղաքական հարցերու մասին, խոսած ենք ռադիոգայանի մասին. You used to work for KPFK back then. But now that you have come back from, it's been 4 or 5 years you're teaching in New Zealand. Why don't you tell us about what you're doing there, and why not about the Armenian community, if any? Yep. I'm sure there is some, because there is no place where there are no Armenians. But the Armenian community in New Zealand, in Auckland, in New Zealand in general, the Armenian activity maybe. Let's start.
Yep. Okay.
Yes, please. Azadiska, guzes hayrenov, guzes anklerenov, whichever is more comfortable, or maybe
Aveli ankleren biri khosim, որև հայրենը շատ քեշ է։
Չէ, այնքան քեշ չէ, բայց feel free. Feel comfortable. All right.
Yeah, գարցեմ 4 տարի եղած է բիրիելա July 2014 is when I went to
July
New
is
Zealand.
very
Yeah.
soon.
So it'll be 4 years.
4 years.
I went there to teach at the University of Auckland. You know, I got offered the job. I called a friend of mine who lives in New Zealand. I said, "What do you think?" He said, "You'll love it." And so
Are you loving it?
Well, parts of it. It's always hard to move, and I'm sure. Look, hayera biri haskanana siga. Amenan come for your tas to a new country. Because you have to adjust to a new culture.
Definitely,
and you have to adjust
of
to a new way of life, and I mean even the way they lay out streets, everything is different, everything.
And even
and you're upside down.
And exactly, and even
north
the
is south and south is north.
Now it's
winter is summer,
change.
summer is winter.
I think it's the only place where Santa Claus comes in the summer and comes from the ocean.
Right. We go to the beach.
To celebrate New Year's,
Christmas
right?
Christmas and New Year's, that's right.
And here in
I
California,
spent it on a beautiful beach.
We pretend that it's snowing at Christmas time,
right.
although it does not. It's
is.
94 degrees. But anyway, yeah, you are. That's what I was saying. Actually, you're from the other side of the world.
Yeah.
Both latitude and longitude.
So before
Okay.
I moved to New Zealand, I had been there a couple of times, and I had met the Armenians. One of the times I went in 2012, I gave a talk at the Center for Human Rights at the university where I now work, which was within the law program. And the Armenian community found out and they came. So I met many of the Armenians 2 years before I even was offered the job. And there's a wonderful but small community in Auckland, and there's a wonderful and small community in the capital, which is called Wellington. And from diverse parts, people from Armenia, people from Iraq, people from South Africa, Armenians, from Uzbekistan, from Iran.
Wow.
So it's a really
That
interesting.
proves my theory. There's no place where there are no Armenians.
I
even
think
in
that's
South
absolutely
Africa.
right. That's absolutely right. And so I had already met some of them, and they're lovely people. So it was an already existing community for me to be there. Now, originally when I went there, I was hired to teach specifically the intersection of media and politics, as you know, because the last time I came on your program, we talked about.
It was about killing the messenger.
It was about Kill the Messenger, the first book I wrote. And, but it's evolved now a bit. I've started to look into the intersection of New Zealand and the Armenian genocide. And that's been a fascinating journey to find out that here, this country that's essentially as far away as you can get from Armenia was covering the atrocities on the Armenians from before the genocide, during the genocide, and after. I counted 45,000 articles in the New
Say it
Zealand
again.
newspapers.
Did I hear you right? 45,000?
45,000
45,000
articles about Armenia or the Armenians over a 100-year period of
in
time.
New Zealand media.
In the New Zealand newspapers, because remember, this was before we
course,
had television
of
and that. So, I mean, you could have learned about the pogroms on the Armenians before the genocide, about the fact that they had to step aside when a Muslim walked by, that they were tagged and had to wear particular clothing so that people would know they were Armenians. This was in the New Zealand newspapers. All the way
100 years ago. Over 100 years ago.
Yeah, starting 100 years ago, all the way up until the genocide. So every time that there were human rights violations, which happened with great frequency before the genocide, this would appear in New Zealand newspapers. Now, some of this was by cable. So keep in mind that New Zealand wasn't its own country until 1907. It was still part of the British Empire.
Yeah.
But and so some of this was cable coming out of, the United Kingdom. But it was, given the distance, you have to think this was relatively thorough. So regular coverage. And then the Armoudian massacres, with great depth it was covered. And with great anguish on the part of the New Zealanders. And during this period of time, you could see that there were great humanitarians in New Zealand because they started to create relief committees for Armenians during the Armoudian massacres. Another set created then during the Armenian genocide. So there is this kind of deep connection to this tiny little country, about as far away as you could possibly get from Armenia.
And recently, the government and the parliament in New Zealand, they refused to pass a genocide recognition.
Well, so they haven't really,
Kind of, it's
they
contradiction,
haven't really
isn't it?
been asked yet as strongly as we are going to ask them. So there's not a very large Armenian community. It's pretty small there. It's actually larger Assyrian community, believe it or not, in New Zealand. So one of my theories about Armenians, which may or may not be true, but this is just something I've been thinking about.
That's why it's called a theory, huh?
It's just a theory, is that because we have endured so many human rights abuses in our history just for being Armenian, that we have maintained a sort of intergenerational trauma that gets passed on from generation to generation. And when you don't have a large community in a place, that intergenerational trauma comes out in ways like shyness, about your cause. You want to sort of blend in instead of standing out. And it's only when you get a critical mass that you start to feel courageous enough to ask for the things that you deserve. Well, in New Zealand, even though there were great humanitarians helping the Armenians, the prime minister at the time of the genocide was heading up one of the committees looking at the atrocities and wrote about in the reports all of the atrocities that occurred, but didn't feel like he wanted to take another step forward. This was back.
Take it to the next level.
To take it to the next level. That was at the time of the genocide. Since then, it's like the Armenians have faded from memory. And part of that has been engineered. So we have a phrase in political science called memory entrepreneurs.
Okay, so let's take that and come back with it for after the break. All right? Գովասներին հետ կվերադառնանք, զրույցը սկսալ ջերմանալ։ Հարգելի բարեկամներ, այսօրվա մեր զրուցակիցը դոկտոր Մարիա Արմուդյանն է, հայտնի եւ հաղորդավար եւ լրագրող եւ գիտական քաղաքական գիտությունների դոկտոր եւ դասախոս Նյու Զիլանդի Օքլանդի համալսարանեն ներս։ Ժամանած է Լոս Անջելես եւ մենք արիթ օգտագործենք. We were talking, or actually you were talking right about memory entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
What is that?
So the concept is, the idea is that there are people who try to manipulate the past in order to bring something about in the present and the future. And the reason I brought that up...
To justify something in the present or the future.
Or to direct something.
Or to direct something.
A policy or a public
You're reminding
diplomacy.
Me of something, we'll talk about it. Keep going, please.
So what happened in New Zealand, so during World War I, just before the Armenian genocide, actually, the Armenian genocide began, the official day, right as New Zealand soldiers were going in to Gallipoli. So there had been, they call that Anzac Day because of the Australian-New Zealand soldiers, right? And New Zealanders see this as the day, it's an important day, it's an important memory day, it's a day that the nation mourns their losses, and a bit like almost like the national day of the country. So Turkey has used this to gain diplomatic, what's the word I'm looking for?
Advantage?
Definitely, advantage. Perfect, thank you. You've had sleep. I've been on airplanes. But
that's a justification too, okay.
We'll go with that one for now.
All right.
But so Turkey offered to rename that area where Gallipoli is, where the soldiers died, Anzac Cove, in order to gain this advantage, this diplomatic advantage. Well, and they offered to do this if New Zealand and Australia would then rename their area after Ataturk. And they have made these efforts to invite New Zealanders and Australians to come and, mourn their dead in the spot where they were killed. And this has gained a lot of favor in both Australia and New Zealand. And so what's happened is that that whole period of time, the entire World War I, all of the atrocities that were going on at the time have slowly died in the memories of New Zealanders and Australians by attrition. Through this reimagining of World War I as just between Anzac and the Ottoman Turkish forces. So now, every year, when they have their National Day of Mourning in New Zealand and Australia, the Turks send over their diplomatic people, and they participate in the memorial services of Anzac Day. They've renamed 4 areas, well, one particular area, but they put up 4 monuments for the Turks in New Zealand. They've renamed
monuments.
They've renamed an area a sacred area for Maori people, Ataturk Memorial Park. We have
And what did
pictures
the
and we
Maoris-
can show that. The Maoris
the
were very
Maoris do?
upset about this. So now,
I think this is one of them.
well,
That-
this is the Ataturk Memorial, and there's another photo you'll see where you actually, this is another memorial that is inside of, and if you can see that the name of this park, they've kept the Maori name, but they've also named it.
Rangitatau Reserve.
That's the Maori name.
The Maori name.
But you can see now Ataturk Memorial Park. It's one of the most beautiful areas of Wellington.
And you know, it's very, I would say, interesting to, or thought-provoking, saying Ataturk Park in New Zealand.
Is that insane?
As I was saying, you have come from the other side of the world.
That's right.
Ataturk Park in New Zealand.
And
that
in
has to be-
Australia.
And in Australia.
Yes.
That has to be paid for.
Yes, they did definitely cough up the money for it. Turkey.
Not necessarily, well, maybe yes, but not necessarily when I say paid for, not necessarily financially, like
Yes.
with money. There is, I was just saying, there's some kind of a trade that
Yes.
has been taken place. And you reminded me of another, actually more of a politico-physiological term, and that is engineered history.
Yeah.
It is pretty similar. And I guess now maybe the Armenian community in New Zealand is trying to do something,
Yeah.
or at least you
Yeah.
are trying to
Well, there are a
get
few
them-
of us. I have to give extreme credit to Serge Tankian. Serge Tankian has moved to New Zealand, lives there part of the time, and he has made very good friends with some of the parliamentarians that are in the Green Party there. And there is one in particular who has become a champion of our issues and has been, is now part of government because New Zealand has a coalition government shared between three parties, the Labour Party, the Green Party, and a party called New Zealand First. And so these friendships have developed and are now starting to develop into an education for the current government. So simultaneously, I've been working with a young journalist named James Robbins, who is an extraordinary historian of the intersection of New Zealand and Armenian history. And he's just written a book that he's now trying to get published about that interweaving of history, including New Zealand soldiers who rescued Armenians during the genocide, and New Zealand soldiers, Anzac soldiers, who witnessed parts of the Armenian genocide and wrote about them in their diaries, and he has documented all of these things. So he and I have been writing articles in the newspapers, telling these stories both from the current perspective and from the historic perspective, while you know, the relationships have been developed over time. And then we have now engaged the Armenian National Committee of Australia to help us now.
You don't have ANC in New Zealand
Not yet.
Not yet.
But that may be the next step. And so we're working towards early August for an educational session to remind the
This
New
coming
Zealand
August.
government, that's coming August, to remind the New Zealand government of this honorable history in which its journalists covered our issues with great veracity. Their everyday citizens were raising money and trying to help the Armenians and the orphans and with all kinds of aid. And the soldiers were rescuing Armenians. So we're just trying to bring that history back and say, look, don't forget us now.
This is your own
We're
history.
part of your fabric. Today, we live here in New Zealand. We are residents of New Zealand, and some of them are citizens. I'm a resident, but not a citizen yet. And yeah, 5 more years, 4 more years.
Oh, that long?
Well, I'm a permanent resident, so it takes 4 more years to be
Oh,
an
I see.
actual
Oh, okay.
citizen. So this is what we're working towards now, and August is the first month where we'll start the campaign there.
You know, I'm curious about who was that friend who said you will love it, because I'm feeling that I owe him or her a thank you.
Because I
for
moved to New
having
Zealand?
Yes.
What, you
For
wanted
having-
me to leave? You wanted me to
I
leave
don't
Los
want
Angeles?
I didn't want you to leave, but apparently
you're
now that
thanking-
you are
Yeah.
now that you are there, you're doing a wonderful job. Probably with that friend and involved, you know, many people. And here we're hearing that less than 2 months from now, you're going to be educating the government,
We're
which I
hoping,
believe,
yeah.
which I believe it is educating, because
We're really reminding them more than anything else.
I
Reminding
agree.
them.
I agree somehow, but I also believe that there are many, many people, even if they are government officials and they have maybe high education, high levels of degrees and so on, maybe they don't know the history very well. At the same time, they could be, I don't know, wonderful economists or physicists or even political scientists, but they might not be that articulate in history. Because at one point that history was kind of distorted.
Yep.
As I'm hearing, as everyone is now seeing, there's an Ataturk Park in Wellington.
That's right.
The capital of New Zealand.
That's right.
It sounds a little, or looks a little weird, but it is a reality.
And Australia.
And Australia. Okay,
And
now
in
speaking,
Australia, let me just say now.
we'll come back
Okay.
for Australia because you already have some connection with, apparently with Australia too. So we'll come back and talk about it
Okay.
right after this break.
Great.
If you don't mind.
Sure.
All right. Ռոբեներ եւ գվերաթարնանք հարկելի բարեկամներ եւ զրույցը կընկլայնվի նաեւ դեպի Australia.
I know very little about it.
Շարունակենք մեր զրույցը, այս երեկոյան հարկելի հարազատներ, մեր դաղավարին է մեր զրուցակիցը դոկտոր Մարիա Արմուդյանը, ժամանած Նյու Զիլանդեն, բայց իհարկե Լոս Անջելեսի մեջ տարիներով ծավալուն գործառույթուն դարած. We're speaking about Australia, right?
Yes.
So can we move from NZ to AU?
Yeah. Yeah. So Australia has many more Armenians,
Of course.
something like 50,000. The Premier of New South Wales.
Speaking of 50,000, how many you estimate the number in New Zealand? Auckland and Wellington?
400.
That's it.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
400.
So, and there's a total population of New Zealand is only 4.5 million.
Of course, understandable, but again...
But we're working on it. We're trying to get a few more. So if you want to move to New Zealand, let us know.
Oh no, you're acting like you're a friend, right?
Yeah.
Well, get me a position and I will.
Okay, it's a deal.
We'll make it 401.
Okay, that's right. I think 400 is a generous number.
Okay. We'll make it 400 then.
So New Zealand, so Australia does have a healthy, big Armenian population, and you may know that the Premier of New South Wales is Armenian, Gladys Berejiklian.
By the way, that's only a
It's a state. Yeah.
Nahank
essentially.
Kareli
Yeah.
Elayo. Do they call it state there or it's a
Yeah,
province?
yeah.
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 District, state, right?
Yeah. And there are also great thinkers and organizations there. They've been there for a lot longer than the
ANC
Armenians
is
in
there
New Zealand.
too.
The ANC is there. There's another great writer. He's written a book about Australia's history with Armenia. Viken Babgenyan has done this. And he's done this amazing work also about the humanitarian efforts of Australians. For the Armenians. So you see that there are these great connections. People just need to be reminded. And that's what we're working on doing now.
That's wonderful to hear, and I'm really, really amazed. I salute you, actually, and everyone who is working with you or you're working with. It's a collaborative thing. With that, well, I thought the number would be at least a few thousands.
Yeah.
So actually, it's only a few hundreds, but you're trying.
But we're
to
working on it.
Exactly. You're working on it, and meanwhile, you're working on getting where you want to get. Regarding educating the government and bringing the reality into the reality again and so on.
And it makes sense, particularly for the New Zealand government, because New Zealand has often been on the forefront of issues that were ethically correct. And I mean, it was the first country to give women the right to vote, for example, and it was willing to...
Yeah, even before our own democracy.
Yeah. So it does have a history of saying, well, let's do the right thing.
So you're saying that there is the right background maybe, or the fertile soil for
I do think
the
so.
right work to be done.
I think the complication is that Turkey has an implicit threat around Gallipoli and being able to access those graves. And all of those diplomatic exchanges that have happened over the last few decades. So that is the complication. And they do pull a lot of weight. There were some, when the Australians were putting forward the resolution and trying to recognize the Armenian genocide, there was a threat. Well, you can forget about coming to Gallipoli and
I think that is called intimidation, right?
it is intimidation.
Intimidation.
There's no doubt about it.
That's the only thing that they have done for over 600-700 years of so-called history, whether it's Ottoman Empire or the Republic of Turkey. Now, if you don't have anything else to say, maybe about New Zealand, or if there is anything that I didn't ask about or you didn't say, of course, you are more than welcome to. However, I want to make a little shift here about our own wonderful United States. But if you still have something to add in that regard, like New Zealand, Australia, let's do that first. And then I have a reason to ask you what I'm going to ask you about.
Okay.
So what about New Zealand, Australia? Can we move on?
We can.
All right. Well, before we do, and I'm sure all of our viewers, the Armenian community here, you're not a stranger, they're not strangers to you. We all wish you all the best. And if there is something like a little things that we can do from here to support your efforts, we'll try our best. And, you know, sometimes when we are looking at something or a problem or an issue, sometimes it would be different if we looked from far away. To see the big picture, sorry, the big picture or the better picture, sometimes you have to kind of distance yourself and see it so you may, for example, describe it better, describe it in a more correct way, or even if there is a problem, needs a solution, you might be able to see the solution. Now that you have been out for 4 years, it's like looking onto the earth from the moon or from space. You see the beauties, you see where the, I don't know, the most pollution is, and so on and so forth. From New Zealand, how do you see the United States?
Yeah, so let me back up a little bit. So when I wrote the first book, Kill the Messenger, I had written that, and that was the last time we were on the program together. So let me just back up and talk about that a little bit as a context.
Sure.
That was a book with 11 chapters where I looked at the media's role in some very dark, awful situations, the Rwandan genocide, the Bosnian War, the Holocaust, and then also some potentially good things, like helping about peace processes in some places, but also about the dismantling of democracy in Chile, and then the bringing it back. And what happens is that media in the United States, and this was part of the motivation for the book, was I was saying, look, media have already started to polarize in the US. We're getting two very different narratives.
When you said.
And there's a narrative that is what I identified in my research as what I'd call a hate frame or a blame frame, in which we look at politics. Politics are very complex. There are a lot of things that cause an event to happen or a phenomenon to develop. But when people blame one group of people for political problems and direct hateful language toward them, then it starts to get embedded into the brain in a particular way. And neurologists can actually trace this. When that starts to happen, the dehumanization of one group of people, you start to get a polarization. Now, this is what I saw this starting to happen in the United States back when you had the extreme kind of nasty, dehumanizing language towards particular groups. At the time, it was against liberals, but now you see it more, whether it's toward Muslims or immigrants or whatever that is, and this polarization is happening. You've got one media that is, you know, angry about Donald Trump. You have another media that is angry about immigrants or whatever the liberals or Nancy Pelosi or whomever that is.
Should we say extremely angry?
Which side? Yes, I would say we have lost our civility in the United States.
Oh, that's bad.
It's very bad. You're seeing it every day in many places. I think California is one of the few saving graces in terms of it's still a relatively civil place. But when you see what's happening in the language that is being used on the president's Twitter feed and the language that's being repeated in particular media, it's reminiscent of these places that ended up in mass violence and in these places in which democracy was completely disintegrated. So I don't know how solid the US institutions are to withstand a population that is against itself.
And polarizing again. And just speaking of California, I'm not sure if next time you come back to California, you will see California the way you have seen California last time, because I'm sure you know someone has proposed to turn California into three states, and it is on the November ballot. Well, with that kind of revisiting the last 2 weeks interesting news, I would say, let's take another break and we'll come back and continue from that point. Եվ այսպես հարգելի բարեկամներ, գծավալի մեր զրույցը այնուամենայնիվ վերադարձում մենք կունենանք մեր վերջին հատվածը պիտի ասեի ցավոք։ Վերադարձանք եւ ահավասիկ կշարունակենք ցավոք կսեի վերջին հատվածը գփորձենք եզրափակել գենտատրեմ որ պիտի ցախողենք. So Dr. Armoudian, back to our own US.
Yes.
I agree, and I have to admit that to look at something you have to distance yourself a little bit to see better and to see the whole picture, as I was saying earlier. And it just happened to you. A friend caused you to take that job and move to New Zealand, and that was an opportunity for you to see it from far. Now, you're kind of reflecting on that, and I'm kind of being scared.
Of what's happening in the United States?
The way you're telling.
I mean, if you look at also what is happening in the alliance, in the World Alliance, our current president in the United States is distancing himself from the other democracies. He's distancing himself from Canada, from the European countries. He's instead saying very positive things about authoritarians.
He got closer to the most wonderful democracy, North Korea.
Exactly. Yeah, and saying positive things. I mean, so these are human rights abusers. You know, these are people who like kill their own people regularly. And so you have to wonder what's going to happen in the global order. And where are we going?
And you don't mean the New World Order in this case.
What I mean is that
the global order,
that the alliances that have historically been there are changing, and it's I don't know how healthy it is, the direction that it's going.
So am I sensing like a darker picture now?
Well, it could be. I certainly think that the attacks on the press and the attacks on the judiciary when it doesn't go in the direction that our president wants to go are not healthy. We need independent media. There's a reason why I focused on media. And in my second book, which was about war correspondents and human rights reporters, called Reporting from the Danger Zone, these journalists risk their lives to get us information and to help us to see things in a different way. Hrant Dink was a perfect example. And they frequently are under threat. But who would have thought that the entire institution would be under threat in the US, being attacked by its own president?
Is it? You see it that way?
I think that there is a delegitimation effort. If you constantly call traditional media fake news, then people start to doubt the veracity and the truthfulness coming out of traditional journalism. Now, I'm not saying they're perfect. After all, I wrote Kill the Messenger. There are problems always in traditional media, but they usually...
What do you mean by traditional media?
What I mean is newspapers, the New York Times, Washington Post, the Los Angeles Times. These journalists actually try to tell us the truth. There are mistakes. There's no doubt about it. The New York Times really did us a disservice by not telling us the truth about the Iraq War. There was one particular journalist there who was just too cozy with the administration. And we ended up going to war partly because people didn't understand what the reality was about the weapons of mass destruction.
Well, later Colin Powell told us about it, said, oh, we found out that there was no weapons of mass destruction.
Right.
Sorry.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But this particular journalist, I always joke around in my classroom, I say, no names, but her initials are Judith Miller, was fired from the New York Times when they see that a journalist has not done his or her job properly. They do move them on because there has to be trust. And the efforts of traditional media to fact check things normally, not that they don't get things wrong, they do, is now being attacked by a person who should respect the role of journalists. That's an independent check on government. That's supposed to be holding government accountable. That's part of the role of a journalist in a democracy.
Somehow it just does make sense. However, there are some opinions saying that if that person that you were referring to, not if actually you were referring to the president, to Donald Trump, there are some opinions that say he wasn't the way he is now. Like, for example, he wasn't a racist, or he didn't make that kind of comments that he used to make now when he was not a president, when he was just a businessman, a real estate mogul. What changed? Does he have a reason? Do you think there is a reason behind this whole thing?
I have a suspicion, but that's all it is. So I haven't researched this. But in the earlier segment, when we were talking about the polarization of media in the United States, I suspect that he started listening to particular media. No names mentioned, but its initials are Fox News.
That's the initial. Okay,
I think that those types of programs have persuaded him.
And some companies are nowadays trying to buy Fox News.
I want to say one more thing about this.
Go ahead.
Some of these programs do not believe it themselves. They propagate these messages because it keeps us focused on them so they can sell advertising.
After all, it's business, right?
And it's a business that is traded on Wall Street, and they have to keep their shares rising. And the only way to keep their shares rising, their share cost rising, is to either bring in more revenue, which is advertising, or cut the costs, or buy other media. So it's a business strategy. I don't know how much they actually believe this stuff.
But Horizon is not one of them.
I know.
Right? Okay. And it does make sense. However, just to add, or again, provoke some thought, even media sometimes, as you said, they make mistakes, they do things on purpose, they twist the arm of the reality on purpose. But I don't know what the main logo of the campaign and the presidency, actually, which hasn't been too long, however, was Make America Great Again. And maybe some people were fascinated with that, which is fascinating, yes, but it's not new. I was a very young kid back then, but Richard Nixon was saying the same thing.
He had the same campaign guy.
Same campaign guy. Good reminder, thank you. Ronald Reagan did the same thing.
Same campaign guy.
Now, the reason I'm bringing that back here now, because again, when Ronald Reagan was a candidate and then he became the president, there was this conversation. I was a little older back then and I remember it better, I guess. After all, an actor became our president, a cowboy, and so on and so forth. When the man was serving his presidency, he wasn't liked that much. However, after that, after he was gone, before he died, gone from the post, from the presidency, we started hearing about Reaganism and the great commentator and all the wonderful things that he was doing and he did and he achieved and so on. Do you have an explanation? And we have 1 minute.
Oh my goodness, I can't do it in 1 minute.
Okay.
But I will say...
1 minute and 5 seconds.
I will say, look, we can disagree on policies.
Of course.
And that's what democracy is about. As we go, look, how was this policy? How is it in the long term? So we can look at each administration and the Congress that was with it. And remember, we are supposed to have separation of powers in the United States. And we can talk about those policies before, during, and after and disagree on them. But calling each other bad names does not get us anywhere. And that's what we're dealing with in the United States right now.
Well, you made it very compact, very condensed, and very up to the point in less than 20 seconds. And you were saying I cannot answer in 1
Well,
minute.
I couldn't be
However,
thorough.
no, but actually, it just makes the point very clear, and it just gets across. And since we had time, you gave us time actually. I'll just leave you alone without any question, and I want you to say whatever you wanted to say, something that you might have had in mind, and I didn't have the opportunity to ask you about it because, after all, time is, it seems 1 hour, but it flies, it goes very fast. So feel free to make your last comments.
I think democracy is fragile, and I think we have to do everything we can possibly do to protect democracy in the United States.
And what is that possibly we can do in 15 seconds?
I really think we need to protect the right to free speech, an independent judiciary, and I strongly feel like we need a divided government. It shouldn't be all one party, because that's a check and balance.
Well, that is what came up after the and or by the elections. However, we'll have some hopes. And unfortunately, the time is over, so I have to thank you, and I have to thank our viewers. Մեզի հետ հարգելի բարեկամներ, Դոկտոր Մարիա Արմուդյանը, շնորհակալություն
Շնորհակալություն։
եւ բարի նստես։